this mess. Hagar is likely a very young girl. As I said, she was from Egypt, a slave, purchased by Abraham to do Sarah's bidding, whatever Sarah wanted her to do. Hagar's not part of this family. She's a foreigner. She is an outsider. She has no rights. She has no voice. She has no freedom. This family owns Hagar. She's a piece of property. The circumstances were not Hagar's fault. She was victimized by this family. No one asked her how she felt about marrying an 85-year-old man and carrying his child, but I'm guessing she was not wild about that idea. She was forced to do this. Neither Abraham or Sarah considered Hagar and asked the question, what will this mean for Hagar? How will this affect her life? No one sees her in this situation. No one cared about Hagar. So Hagar's identity was in being a slave, someone without importance. She existed to please other people and do what they said. She likely had no sense of herself, of her own value. Hagar's circumstances helped her create and adopt a slave mentality about herself. Hagar had a false belief that her circumstances had the power to either give her value or take away her value. Because Hagar's identity was based on her circumstances, her perception of her identity changed every time her circumstances changed. And that's what's typical with people. When the circumstances are positive, they feel positive. When circumstances start to go south, then they don't feel good about themselves anymore. That's normal human response. But Hagar's her perception of her identity is not based on anything that's solid or true. She saw herself as nothing except a slave. But now that she's bearing Abraham's child, we see her attitude change because her perception of her value has changed. She sees herself as someone important because of the baby. The truth, however, is that Hagar always was valuable. Always. She was always an important person. She mattered, and her life mattered. No matter what she did, no matter what happened to her, her life was significant. Her value is based on something that never changes. She was made by God, and He loves her. She is good stuff. This is true for you too. No matter what has happened to you, no matter what you have done, you are important, and God loves you. You do not have the power to depreciate your identity. You do not have the power to improve your identity. There's your blank. Power. Your identity is based on something that never changes. God made you a valuable human being, and that remains true every day of your life, no exceptions. God has made you, and God defines you. You are a son or daughter of the Most High God. That's your true identity. You are a child of the King. Let's go back to Hagar. Suddenly her story changes. So one day she's a slave, and the next day she's elevated to wife status and finds herself pregnant with the boss's child. And this is what changes her perspective about her identity. We can see this in her new attitude, despising Sarah. Hagar was honestly and truly victimized by Sarah and Abraham. We're not disputing that. But she was allowing her circumstances to define her value. Then after she is wounded by them, what happens? This is important. She turns around and returns the favor. She becomes the offender. First she was wounded, not her fault. But then she becomes the one who does the wounding. She becomes the offender. This is the dynamic we've already seen in our class twice. We saw this with Joseph. We saw this with Tamar. Yes, truly, terribly wounded, both of them, victimized, both of them. But then they turned around and became an offender to those around them. And why did they do that? Because their feelings had not healed. When your feelings don't heal, then it propels you to make bad choices and become an offender yourself. And Hagar does that by getting back at Sarah, trying to make her miserable. Your blank there is always. So acting like a victim, Hagar rubs Sarah's nose in the fact that she got pregnant and Sarah could not. And this was not the smartest thing Hagar could have done. She may have been Abraham's wife now, but Sarah was still number one woman around here, and no one is confused by that fact except Hagar. Sarah then, at that point, tries to get Abraham to help the situation, but he won't, and that's when Sarah begins directing her pain and her hurt straight at Hagar and begins mistreating her. And so Hagar responds by running away. So let's take a closer look at Hagar's choice here. She's pregnant, treated unfairly by Sarah, and not knowing what else to do, she runs. And where does she go? The desert. So was that a good decision or was that a bad decision? Well, let's see. She has no one to help her. She has no money. She has no resources. She has nowhere to go, and she's pregnant. Yes, she may have stopped Sarah from being mean to her, but now she's going to die of dehydration and starvation in the desert. She ran from one bad situation only to find herself in a worse situation, and that's often what happens. When we don't let God be part of our life, when we don't let Him guide our decisions, when we don't listen and say, God, what would you have me do here? What would be the best scenario? When we don't listen to Him, we do things like Hagar did. We bolt and we end up in even more pain and trauma. And I could tell you 150 stories that I've heard over the years of people, including myself, who've done exactly that. When we trust ourselves and not God, our life gets worse, not better. I mean, follow the path of any teen who bolts from home to go live on the streets because they don't want to be in that house anymore. And they may have good reasons for that, but then they end up in a situation where they're being used violently and they're raped and sucked into drug trafficking and all kinds of terrible things and end up dead or in prison. So it's very important that we let God guide our steps, particularly when we're in a difficult spot like Hagar was. What drove Hagar to do such a foolish thing? I already told you, her unhealed feelings. That's what pushed her in that bad direction. She was angry. She was afraid. She'd been abandoned, and now she was alone. She was angry, justifiably, with Abraham and Sarah for how they treated her. I mean, she would have been terribly afraid with such an uncertain future now, feeling abandoned. Here she'd served them for years, and now they weren't willing to help her at all, and they created the problem she was in. Not only did she have herself to think about, but now a baby too. And of course she felt alone. There wasn't anybody supporting and helping her right now. Hagar had very legitimate needs. But she either didn't know God or didn't trust God, and so she tried to meet her needs her own way. I'm not judging Hagar. I'm sad for what she went through. But when she decided to be her own God, she needed a true power source to help make things right in that family. But she chose to be her own power source by running away. She did need a true protector, someone who would guard her and protect her against being mistreated. But she chose to be her own protector by leaving. She did need a true provider, somebody who would meet her very real needs. But she chose to provide for herself by running to the desert. And there's your 3 blanks: power, protector, provider. So I want you to hang on to this thought. You might even want to write it down. I want you to write down that Hagar did not do everything right, but God showed up and helped her anyway. Even though she didn't do it all right, she made some mistakes. She had some foolish choices there. There's so much hope in that, because it shows us that we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to do it all right. We can mess up, and God will always be there for us. All right, let's go back to Genesis. Continue on in our story. We're in verse 7 now. The angel of the Lord found Hagar near the spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? I love this part of the story. So even though Hagar is a foreigner, she's not part of this chosen family. Even though she's just this lowly slave in the eyes of the world, and even though she makes mistakes, God shows up. He comes to her. He found her, and there's your blank, showed. And then what? He says to her, Hagar, slave of Sarai. God knows her name. God knows who she works for. God knows what she does. God knows Hagar. She doesn't really know him, does she? But God knows her and sees her. And he doesn't just say to her, hey, you idiot, what are you doing down there in those bushes? No, he doesn't say that. He knows her. He cares about her. And he reaches out to her in her trouble. And then what? Then what does God do? He asks her a couple questions. Where have you come from, and where are you going? Well, that's kind of weird. Why is God asking her questions? Why does God ask her to explain where she's going? Hasn't he been paying attention? Doesn't he know what's happened in the last months in the Abraham family? Is he lacking information? Or is he inviting Hagar to share her heart? Is he inviting Hagar to share her story with him? Does he want Hagar to share her pain with him so he can share her burden with her? God invited Hagar into a personal relationship with him. There's your blank, invited. And this is what we're doing in healing prayer number 1. We are inviting God into our painful situation. And I wonder what Hagar will choose. Let's see, verse 8b. I'm running away from my mistress Sarah, she answered. It worked. Hagar responded to God. She answered his question. And then as she shared her heart with him, God came back with a new plan. There's your blank, plan. Verse 9. Then the angel of the Lord told her, go back to your mistress and submit to her. Whoa, baby, that is one bad plan. You want me to go back to Sarah? She's the one causing all the trouble. Can I have a different angel, please? I bet Hagar did not see that coming. That would be God's response to her. But that would be the dirt perspective. Trying to understand God's will based only on what we see and understand. And that's why we have to stand on the knowledge of God's character and on God's promises. That's why we have to stand on that. It's the only thing we can fully trust, because we will not always understand why God tells us to do certain things. God loves Hagar. He wants the best for her, and that's true for you too. Any plan he has for Hagar and her baby is a good plan. A plan coming from love for both of them. A plan that will protect them and provide for their needs, because that is who God is. I want to clarify something here, though. God is not sending Hagar back to be abused more. God hates abuse. That's never his plan. That is not what he has in mind here. God wants us to be safe, so he would never send somebody back to be further abused. God has a plan here that will give everyone in this family, the best possible life. He's considering everyone. He loves everyone. He loves Sarah. He loves Abraham. He loves Hagar. He loves this child. Let's keep going. Verse 10. Then the angel added, I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count. The angel of the Lord also said to her, you are now pregnant, you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. He will be a wild donkey of a man. His hand will be against everyone, and everyone's hand against him, and he will live in hostility toward all his brothers. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her, you are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. That is why the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. It is still there between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore him Ishmael. God provided for Hagar. She too received a covenant promise from God. Remember that God blessed the seed of Abraham. Hagar received the seed, so Hagar received the blessing. And this meant she would become the mother of a great nation, too numerous to count, and she would have a son named Ishmael. The Lord heard her and saw her and took care of her. And what effect did this encounter have on Hagar? Here's the big surprise in the story. Meeting God changed Hagar. She's no longer a victim. She's a child of God. When Hagar returned to Abraham's camp, she was not the same woman. And that's why there's hope in this story. God had healed her. He healed her by revealing his love and caring for her. And that changed Hagar forever. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I am now seeing the one who sees me. Isn't that the cry of all of our hearts? For somebody to see us for who we really are, our true heart. El Roi is the name for God, meaning the God who sees. And Hagar was the one who gave God that name. Seeing God for who he truly was helped Hagar see who she truly was. When she saw him love her, she knew she was lovable. She knew she was worth being loved. When she saw that in God's face toward her. The reflection in God's face of love for her changed her. This transformation in Hagar would have changed the dynamic in every relationship in her life. And that's why it was safe to go home. Hagar had been part of the problem, and now that was changed. Hagar had a new identity. I am special to God, and He loves me. I want you to write this down. The circumstances of Hagar's life did not change. The circumstances of Hagar's life did not change. But her identity did. And that changed her life. You see, it's not about the circumstances. We always focus there. If I just had a different set of circumstances, a better set of circumstances, then everything would be fine. But until we are operating from truth, guys, until we have it in our minds, in our hearts, and are operating from that truth, we're just going to go from one bad situation to another. God's plan was a good one. She gave birth to Ishmael, and they remained with Abraham and Sarah until Ishmael was of age, and then they made their own home away from that family with God's blessing. And in closing, I just want you to know that God sees you. God sees and knows your suffering. He cares about your pain. If He'll rescue someone who was not even His child at that point, how much more will He rescue you? Someone who is His child. Just like Hagar, you and I, we all are both victims and offenders. True for every human being. But God, nevertheless, still sees you, still cares about you, and will still help you. He will guide your life, but just like Hagar, you must exercise your free will at every point to obey God. And there are your blanks. Sees, cares, and help. God is not only running the universe, but He is also intimately involved in the details of your life. He cares about you. All right, so you see something new there on your outline. So we, Liz and I, after she was here in November, and we listened to the feedback you guys had, we wanted to try something different in our third unit. So what we've done is we've lightened up the daily journey steps. We're going to be very interested to hear your feedback. We're going to move a little bit of that focus to Monday nights, to our time here together to lessen the parts that you will do on your own. So we're going to see how you feel about that and how that works for you. So you're going to do two things instead of your normal one thing. You're still going to write your impact statement, but now you have another reflection here. I'm going to give you a moment to write about it. Our painful feelings drive us to do all kinds of foolish things, just like they did for Hagar. Take a moment and ask God to reveal to you a time when you did something regretful. So can you relate to Hagar in some way when she bolted toward the desert? Something that was a reaction to your painful feelings. You see, reflect on that for a moment and see if you can think of a time in your own life. And then write the statement on what impacted you in our lesson. So I'll give you a few extra minutes right now. Any questions?